Alright guys, today we are playing Axis and Allies 1941, the entry-level game into Axis and Allies. Now, what you will see is the GIMP on a very painful day. He's going to have trouble talking and moving his hands and back at the same time. You will hear me stopping and going when I'm speaking. You will hear me mixing up a lot of terms, alright? They all pretty much mean the same, but I'll mix them up. Spots, zones, C zones especially, tongue twister there, territories. I even think I called them sectors at one point. Also get control and conquered. I'll interchange those words. All right, so bear with me. I think I got all the rules in there. It's the first time I've ever played any type of Axis Allies, but I do believe I got most of the rules right. If not, please leave a comment below and let me know if they're wrong. All right, but no need will grognards, throwing shade. Be gentle. So, have fun. To set up Axis and Allies 1941, we're going to put the board out in the center of the table. Then we are going to take these stacking counters and put them in a pile off to the side of the board. We are also going to take the dice, put them off to the side of the board. Next, we're going to build the battle board. Okay, to assemble the battle board, we're going to take the board here that says attacker, defender on it. We're going to make sure attacker is facing one side and defender is facing another. And then we're going to take this casualty board and place it behind where it says defender on it, leaving enough room to maneuver little figures in on both sides of this battle board part here. Axis and Allies is a team game. One side will play the Axis, the other side will play the Allies. Alright, now, I know we play these games to have fun with our friends, and we like attacking them, but we can attack Allies. So if you're on the Axis team, you can attack the Axis. If you're on the Allied team, you can attack the Allies. If you are playing with 5 players, then each player will take control of one country in the game. If you are playing with fewer than 5 players, then you will have to split the players up into these 2 teams as evenly as possible. Yeah. So the Axis consists of Germany and Japan. The Allies consist of Russia, England, and the US. Once players have decided which team and which country they want to be on, they will choose all of the components for that country, which consist of 10 of these country markers, 8 infantry, 10 tanks, 2 bombers, 4 fighters, 2 destroyers, 4 transports, 3 submarines, 2 battleships, and 2 aircraft carriers. Now, each scope is different depending on which country you are. It'll be a little different from the other countries. A plane may look a little different for Russia than it does for, say, Japan. But the values and how they move and all that is the same for any unit of that type, no matter what they look like. Once you have collected all of the player pieces for each player, that player will take one of their nation tokens here, and they will place it up here on the national production chart track in the space that corresponds with the flag of their country. So here Japan would go to 9, Russia would go to 7, England and Germany share a space at 12, and the US here is at 17. Alright, if we look at the back of the rule book, it also tells you where to put your national token up here on the NPC chart, up here on the top right corner of every table for every country in the setup chart here. Speaking of the setup chart, let's get into it. Like I said, each country has their own chart, and this chart will tell you where and how many units of a specific type to put in a territory. If we look at the board real quick, we can see there are 2 types of territories. There are C territories or C zones, C spots. I will interchange this word throughout, but they are all blue. They have a number in them identifying which C zone they are. And they all have borders indicated by these lines here. Now, the land zones are color-coded depending on the country they belong to. Germany here is like a darkish, brownish, green, tan thing. Germany is red. The US is green. The Japanese Empire here is orange. And England here is a tan. These gold ones are that 3rd type. They are neutral. We'll get back to them later. Also, if you look at the territories, they are divided by borders, which I will show you up here in Russia, which will separate each individual zone. And also on the coastline here is a border between the water and the coast. Inside of each territory There may or may not be a factory symbol. We'll get back to that. But there will be a flag indicating which nation that territory belonged to at the beginning of the game. Above that is a number which corresponds to this national production chart. Each territory with this number will affect this chart. We'll get back to that later. And some of these territories will have a red square with the name of the city, and it's in red lettering. The name of this city is the capital of the city. Now that we know what the territories look like, we're almost ready to start actually setting up our little figures here. The game does not come with enough figures to fill the board with by themselves. Instead, that we will use these stacking tokens. If we look down here, we have the gray ones, which are a value of 1, the green ones, which are a value of 3, and red ones, which were a value of 5. How this works is, anytime you need more than one unit, you would stack that unit on top of one of these tokens, indicating that you had that many units. The unit itself is considered 1, and then whatever the value of the token is. So in this case, I would have 2 infantry here, 1 for the infantry unit, 1 for the token. 2 equals 2 for infantry. If I moved over here, I'd have 4 infantry, 3 for the token, 1 for the infantry. And it works the same with any other unit, whether it be tanks, planes, etc. If you ever run out of these or anything else to indicate that you use more tokens than you have, you can use anything in its place. Alright, so now I'm going to walk you through Russia, and then after that I'll come back and then the rest of the board will be set up and we'll be ready to get started. Like I said, each country will come with a starting table that they will go through, and each table will have a number of territories that this country controls and how many units of a particular type they have to put in said unit. So if we look up here, the first one for Russia is actually Russia, and it needs 6 infantry. I'll put this red chip down, indicating I have 5 infantry, and then stack the figure on top for the 6. It needs 1 tank and 1 fighter. Okay, so now the territory of Russia is done. We go down here to the next one, Archangel, which is 3 infantry. If we go to the next one, Karela, they need 3 infantry. Okay, Caucasus down here gets 3 infantry and 1 tank. The final land territory for the Russian team is up here in Siberia, which gets 3 infantry. If we go up here to C-Zone 4, they will get 1 submarine placed in there. Alright, now if we look in the setup, it says England has a fighter in C-Zone 14, and then next it mentions a carrier. Anytime it has a fighter in a C-Zone, it will automatically go on top of the carrier, and then both will be placed in that C-Zone. Alright, now a note while setting up. Germany only has 5 tanks. They have to place like 7 out on the board or something like that, so you're going to have to reserve the 1 chips, especially for Germany. Those 1 value chips run out during setup, so you're going to have to jigger it out the way you want to. I would also advise leaving a couple of the infantry for Russia, because they are the first player to go up, so they will probably be trying to buy some of them first. So, like I said, figure it out on your own. Alright, so this is how the board should look when we are done set up. Now you are basically set up. At this point, I would tell you whoever is the first player how to figure that out, but the rule book dictates that Russia will go first. Now you are set up to play Axis and Allies 1941. Alright guys, let's learn to play Axis and Allies 1941. Axis and Allies 1941 is a World War II simulation game in which a round will simulate a month, a certain amount of time during World War II rather. Each round consists of 5 turns. Every country will get 1 turn, and then that will end the round, and play will continue until we meet a goal, which is one team will either capture the opposing team's capital, or they will have to capture 2 of the opposing team's capitals, depending on the type of game you're playing. I will play the short game, which is 1 capital. If you wanted to play the normal game, it would be 2 capitals. Now, the game will start off with Russia, and then it will move to the German player, followed by the United Kingdom, then Japan, and it will end with the US. If this number of capitals are captured by the end of the US's turn, whoever's team has fulfilled the goal will win the game, and the other team will lose. Alright, so On the player's turn, starting with Russia, there will be 6 phases that we must complete, and we must do these in order. The first phase is purchasing, where we will be able to buy units to place out later on. The next phase is the movement for battle. Okay, the battle movement phase, where we will move our ships and our little planes and our little soldiers here into position to fight, which is the third stage. We will call the combat resolution. I forget exactly what they call it in the rulebook, but we will resolve any combats that we previously have moved units into. The next phase is called the non-combat movement, where if we have any units that weren't involved in combat, we can move them to reinforce our different, sides and all that. The next phase is called the Mobilization Phase. This is where we will take these little guys that we have purchased earlier in our turn, and we will be able to produce them and place them out on the board. And the final stage is called the income stage, and this is where we have an opportunity to collect income to buy our little dudes to place out on the map. Now, the first stage is the purchasing phase. What this phase does is allow players to purchase units to place out on the board later on. If we look up at the NPC chart, that is basically our IPCs, which are credits, industrial production credits. That's basically the cash in the game. The rulebook suggests that one player is like a banker, and with a pen and paper keeps track of all that. I shall be using an additional country marker above the board, right above the numbers that would represent what number I'm trying to get at. All right, instead of writing it all down, this is just going to show me. It's going to be easier for me. You can do it however you want. Regardless, during this phase, we will take the number of IPCs we have, our cash, and we will spend that to buy units. If we look down here on the mobilization chart, it will tell us how many credits that unit will cost. So infantry would cost 3, tanks would cost 6, IPCs, etc. If we look at the territories that we control in the beginning of the game, they have numbers in some of the territories. Some of them also have factories, which is important. We'll get back to that. But these numbers represent your national production credits, which are what is on the NPC chart here. I know all these acronyms are getting confusing. Bear with me. And in the case of a territory with a factory, this number also represents how many units that territory can produce. If we add them all up, then we will get the number that we start off with at the beginning of the game during settlement. All right. Some of our territories will not have these numbers, which means we will not collect income for that. We will not get any NPCs for it. So all we'll simply do is see how many IPCs we have, how much cash we have, and we will spend that on a number of units. We must have the amount of credits available to use. We cannot borrow credits. We can never go into negative credits. Okay, so say Russia wanted to purchase two infantry here. We would place them in the mobilization zone here. We would look down at the mobilization zone, and that'll tell us a bunch of stuff. But one thing it'll tell us is how much that unit costs. Infantry would cost 3, tanks 6, fighters 10, etc. Right? It also tells us how many spaces they can move and their attack and defense value. We'll come back in that in a little bit. But so we wanted to make 2 infantry units. We had enough credits to do that. We would add up how much it would cost. So in this case, 3 and 3 is 6. We would see how many credits we had, and we would spend that amount of credits, and anything left over we could add on during the income phase. We'll get back to that. But in this case, Russia bought 2 units at a value of 3 each. They now have 1 credit. Now, these units will sit in here until we get to the mobilization phase. We'll get back to that. And that is basically the income phase. All right, so the next phase is combat movement. I will start off with the air units, and then I'll go to the sea units and then land units, because that's just an easier way to explain it, I think. But let's take a look at the board again. Okay, now, as I said, the territories are divided by different borders and whatnot. I did not mention islands here. Any island chain that is together and has a flag on it is considered one territory. As we can see here, we have 2 island chains in the same C zone. That'll be a tongue twister. And one is controlled by Japan and the other one by the US. This is 2 different land territories inside of a C zone. Now with canals, you have to have control of both sides of the canal in order to move through it freely. However, the canal itself acts as a border between either land spaces or sea space. The Panama Canal here is controlled by the U.S., even though there isn't any units on it. So this Russian battleship can go through the canal from Sea Space 12 to Sea Space 19 and then engage battle with this German battleship if they choose to. All right, now if we look over here at the Suez Canal, we can see that right now England has control of both sides of the canal, so they control both the waterways and the land territories on both sides of that canal. They could move troops freely from this space to this space if they choose to, because they have control of the canal now. All right, and they could also move their battleship from Z-Zone 28 to C-Zone 17 if they choose to. However, if Germany were to come down here and take control of it, and even though it doesn't have units in it, they still control it as long as they have one of their flags on it. The UK could not move into the land space or move from 28 to 17. All right, it is now considered hostile. Up here we have a strait next to Turkey. We will be ignoring that because Turkey is one of the 3 zones on the game board, which is friendly, hostile, or neutral. We'll get into friendly and hostile in a second, but neutral means we cannot interact with it at all. We cannot fly over it, cross through it, or sail in between it. All right, so Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, the Himalayas, Mongolia, Sweden, the Republic of Ireland here, Spain, most of South America, the Sahara, and parts of Africa here are all neutral. Okay, we cannot interact with those at all. So, in essence, Sea Spot 18 and the Caspian Sea, I think, or the Black Sea, I can't remember. This one is basically, these are basically landlocked. We'll get back to that in a little bit. If we look up here, we have the Irish Sea here between England and Northern Ireland. This is not a canal. This is an open space. You can move from Sea Space 8, is that? Yes, 8 to 6. Freely going in between Ireland and the UK. Now, at the beginning of the game, Gibraltar is considered to be English territory, even though it is surrounded by neutral territory. So, Allied units can go in there and, land there if they want to, whether it be infantry or planes or any land unit or planes. In the sea spaces, 21 here and 30 would be considered adjacent. 20, 36 would be considered adjacent. 19 and 41 would be considered adjacent. If we look down here at East Mexico, that would be considered adjacent to Mexico, which is over here underneath the U.S. Eastern U.S. is considered adjacent to Western U.S. and East and West Canada are considered adjacent. All right, so you can move from left to right or right to left on the board, just not up and down. All right, so we couldn't go from Sea Space 26 up here to Sea Space 3 if we wanted to. Now, as I said, a territory will be either considered friendly, hostile, or neutral. I explained neutral. Friendly and hostile mean if you are in a space with your own units or friendly units, that is considered friendly. If you are in a space with an enemy unit, then that is considered to be hostile. Okay, on friendly zones, you can move in and out with no repercussions as you normally would. In hostile zones, in most cases, if you enter it, you must enter combat and, battle off to see who can gain control of it. The exception with this is airplanes and submarines. We'll get back to that. So while we're talking about planes, let's explain how they work. All right, now I will be using different countries to explain how these units work, how they move and all that. But on your turn, you will be doing this in player order and then in phase order. So Russia will go first. They will do every phase in order. I'm just explaining this with different country units. So if we look down here at the mobilization chart, we can see that each unit has a speed points, movement points. Okay, planes have either 6 movement points if they're a bomber, or 4 movement points if they are a fighter. Every other type of unit in the game can use the maximum points of speed they have, or movement points. I'll be interchanging these terms. All right. Planes cannot. Planes have to reserve a number of points to get back to a friendly zone at the end of the combat phase. All right. Now, it may not be at the end of the combat phase that they actually get back to safety. That could be during the non-combat. I'll get into that in a second. But they have to reserve a number of points to get to a friendly landing zone. All right, so let's look at the bomber here. Like I said, they got 6 points. It's real easy. They cannot fly over neutral zones, but they can fly over any friendly or hostile territories on the board. They have 6 movements. When you come off of land into water, that is considered 1 movement, and vice versa. Going on the land from water is 1 point of movement. All right, so let's say the bomber here is going to come up here to Norway and bomb these guys. So they would go 1, 2, 3. Now, technically, Norway and Finland is 1 territory. So they move 3 spaces, and we'll put them here showing that they are going to enter combat in the next phase. Fighters work a little differently. Fighters can land and take off from aircraft carriers. An aircraft carrier can hold 1 or 2 fighters, but no bombers, only fighters. If a fighter starts on an aircraft carrier, it's basically a free point of movement. Okay, when you enter the sea zone that the aircraft carrier is on. So as if I were coming off land, it would cost 1 point to go from land to sea. Coming off of the aircraft carrier doesn't cost a point of movement. So I could go 1, 2 to attack this guy here. I have to reserve some to get back to friendly land. I'll get back into that in a second. Now, like I said, the airplanes must have enough speed points to get back to friendly zones. Bombers have to be able to get back to land zones. Fighters can land on either land or on the aircraft carrier, even if the aircraft carrier isn't at a zone that they are choosing to land on at the time of the end of the combat phase. The player must declare the intent of where an aircraft carrier will finish its movement at the end of their turn. And if you do have a fighter on an aircraft carrier, you must choose to either move the aircraft carrier first, and then whatever fighters are on that aircraft carrier are considered cargo, or the player will choose to take off. You cannot move the aircraft carrier and then choose to launch a fighter from it. The fighter must go from the aircraft carrier first, and then the aircraft carrier can move to a space where the fighter would want to land later on during the non-combat phase. This is a little confusing. This is one of the only few things that goes between combat and non-combat movement. Now, you can land and take off from your allies' aircraft carriers, but you cannot control it during their turn. Anytime an ally's figure is with yours, you do not control it. The other player will wait till their turn to control it. All right, now we're going to get into the ships, and the submarine is the most complicated ship, so I'm going to start there. But before I do, all ships in the game have 2 points of movement, whether it be a submarine, an aircraft carrier, or whatever. They all get 2 points of movement. You would simply move your ship that many spaces across territories until you get to the speed you have. It could be up to 2, could be none. It's up to you. If a ship moves into a zone with another ship that is an ally of yours, that is considered a friendly zone. If you move into a sea zone that is empty, that is considered a friendly zone. If a ship moves into a sea space with an enemy ships, that is considered hostile. All right. If that happens, the ship would stop and conduct a battle during the next phase, with the exception of the submarine. Let's get into him now. Now, submarines have the ability to move into and through spaces that would have enemy units in it. Normally, it would be considered hostile with any other ship, but with the submarine, they can ignore that unless it were to enter a space with an enemy destroyer, in which case basically all the effects of the submarine are null and void. We'll get back in that in the combat. Submarines do not block movement like other ships would. If you move into a territory with an enemy submarine, you can simply move on like normal. Now, if you are in the same sea zone as an allied player and they have a destroyer in that sea zone, then that does cancel the effect of their movement without notice, moving through hostile zones. They would have to stop and take part of the battle. However, allied destroyers have some rules to them. We'll get into that in the battle phase of the game. All right, so that's basically it for the submarine movement. It gets a lot more complicated with the battle, but we'll just worry about the movement for now. Next, we'll go in the aircraft carriers. Okay, now when playing aircraft carriers, we have a decision to make whether we're going to use it basically as a transport for our fighters, or are we going to use it in combat? So if we were to use the aircraft carrier, we simply move it like any ship, moving 1 or 2 spaces, our choice, or none if we choose to. And if we entered a space with an enemy unit, then we would have to stop and do combat with them. Or we could wait to the non-combat phase and move and pick up airplanes. We'll get back to that later on. Next, we have destroyers. Again, they were move 1 or 2. If they enter a space with a hostile unit, they stop and do battle. They have some special rules involving submarines, nor in combat. We'll get back to that. Destroyers, the same thing. They move into a space with a hostile unit. They will fight. If not, then they can move up to 2 spaces. And the final ship we have is the transport. Now, transports cannot enter hostile zones. Okay, they must enter and finish their turns on friendly zones, with the exception of the amphibious assault. We'll get back to that in the combat phase. Now, when a transport is in a space with an enemy submarine, it is considered friendly. They can move across like normal, even though they do not have any attack or a defense value. Transports can hold and carry cargo, and it can hold up to 2 units. They must be either 2 infantry, 1 infantry and 1 tank, or 1 single tank. They cannot hold 2 tanks. To do so, we would simply put the units that we are carrying with the transport and move the units with the transport. If a land unit is loaded onto a transport, that is considered a movement. They cannot do any combat or non-combat movement after that point. Now again, anytime you're using the aircraft carrier or the transport, you control that unit. Okay, if it had ally units on it, then they could not control the ship that their units are on, and you cannot control their units that are on your ship. Now, you can move the transport 1 time, drop a unit off, and then continue to move and drop off another unit. But you must be in a friendly sea space when you end your movement. Now, if an enemy ship were to enter a zone with a transport, they have the decision on whether to attack it or simply move on. Transports do not block the way of any enemy units. Alright, now let's get into how land units work. Land units can only move from land to land territories. They cannot move from land to water spaces unless there is a transport involved. We'll get into that a little bit later on. Infantry can only move 1 space, and they must go from 1 land to another land, like I said. And if they end their movement in a space with an enemy unit, they would commence attacking. Now, tanks work a little differently. They have something called a blitz. If you move through an allied territory, you can continue to move on and engage in battle with an enemy unit. If you blitz through an enemy territory, it works a little bit differently. If we look down here, Germany's going to run from West Russia into the Middle East, which is controlled by the English. All right, they're going to go through the Caucasus, which is controlled by Russia, English's ally. So they can still move up to 2. They come into the Caucasus here, which is undefended. Even though it is controlled by Russia, there is no units in the territories defending it. Germany can take control of the Caucasus, in which case they will lose any IPCs in their factory, and continue to move on to conquer the Middle East. Or if they wanted to, they could continue to roll on and attack another country that is being defended by one of their enemies. Now, transports can also be used as a bridge to go from one territory to another, as long as the transport connects to the territory in the sea zone that it's in. If we look down here, Germany can attack Anglo-Egypt or the Middle East because this transport is in Sea Zone 17, which is connected to Southern Europe. And they have 2 units here, so they could choose to move 1 unit into one zone and the other into the other zone because they are both connected by this Sea Zone 17. All right, in this case, Germany would automatically take control of the Middle East and then they would have to commence battle here in Anglo-Egypt. Okay, now you can only use 2 units to cross through a transport like a bridge. All right, and it has to abide by the rules of what the transport can hold. It can only be 1 tank, or it could be 1 tank and 1 infantry, or 2 infantries. Okay, it could not be 2 tanks using this as a bridge, and this is not continuous. You can only use it once for each transport that is there. All right, now let's talk about amphibious assault. We're going to set up an amphibious assault over here in C Zone 46. Normally, a transport cannot be in a hostile zone. In this case, we have a hostile ship with our English buddies here, so this would be considered a hostile zone. The only exception to this rule is what's called a amphibious attack, meaning that the transport will enter the zone that is hostile if it is going to drop troops off onto a land attack. In order to do this, you must clear out the hostile sea zone first before you can use the transport to do their landing action, loading the troops. We'll get into how that works exactly during the combat phase. But this is the only time that a transport can be in a hostile zone. Alright, so now we moved all of our units into zones and they're getting ready to fight it off. We move into the combat phase of the game. During the combat phase of the game, we will take all units from the zone that are involved in the combat and we will move them over to the battle board. Okay, this includes the transports, even though they technically do not attack and defend. We'll get back into that in a second. And then there will be a number of rounds, maybe depending on how the battle works out. And whoever is victor will be able to, conquer the territory or eliminate the players in the sea zone that they are in. You can never conquer sea zone. Or the attacker can choose to retreat. If the attacker chooses to retreat, they simply move 1 space away from the sector that they are in, and the defender will, keep whatever zone they are in. Now, I like to do the sea battles first and then the land. Okay, so we'll start over here in Sea Zone 17. Alright, it is the Germans' turn. They are the attacker. England is the defender. We're going to take everything off of this board here and put it in to the battle board in the appropriate space. If we look on the battle board itself, it'll tell you which unit goes in which space on both the attacker and the defender side. So a battleship is in 4 and a submarine is 2 on the attacker side. Then we go to the defender side. We got the aircraft carrier at 2, a submarine at 1. The fighter that was on the aircraft carrier will come off of the aircraft carrier to help defend. Okay, and they have a defense value of 2, so we would put the aircraft carrier and the fighter in the same defense slot there at 2. Okay, and finally we have the transport for England holding these 2 units here. Alright, now transports cannot attack or defend, and any units on the transport cannot attack or defend. They are simply cargo, but they can become casualties. So we are going to put them on the board to show that they can become casualties. They can only become casualties if they are the last ship that you have. Alright, you cannot choose to use a ship of a higher value as a casualty in place of a transport, where normally if you are hit as a defender, you can choose which unit you want to use as a casualty. Alright, now that we got our units set up on the battle board in the corresponding space that they belong to, we can see what their attack value is by looking at where we placed them on the board, or we could look over here at the mobilization board and it'll tell you their attack and defense value. But here we have the battleship with an attack value of 4, a submarine with an attack value of 2, then we have the aircraft carrier with a defense value of 2. The fighter also has a defense value of 2. This submarine here has a defense value of 1. And like I said, transport has neither attack nor defense. Now, battle takes place over a couple rounds of battle, meaning we will roll off several rounds, maybe, depending on the how it ends up. The attacker will always go first, and then the defender will go. They will do a counterattack. But if there are submarines involved and there are no destroyers in the battle, the submarine will have a choice to either submerge and leave the battle, going back to the zone that the battle occurred in, or they can choose to stay in the battle, in which case they will do a surprise attack. This will only happen on the first round of battle, and then everybody else will be able to roll off. During the first round, if the submarine does do a surprise attack, they will not roll off during the next phase of the battle phase, where every other unit would roll off and, you know, see who hit and missed. All right, so let's take a look at the board. We have Germany here with a sub. It's got an attack value of 2, and we have this battleship here with an attack value of 4. There are no destroyers in play here, so this submarine will be able to do a surprise attack. This submarine will also be able to do a surprise attack, being that there are no destroyers on the German side blocking the effect of the submarine. What we will do is take 1 die for each unit that is in the attack, and we will give a die a roll and see what the result is. If it is equal to or lower than the attack or defense value, it is a hit. If it is higher than 4, it is automatically a miss. If it is higher than any value that your attack or defense has, it is a miss. It's just your attack value or your defense value or lower. All right, so like I said, the subs get to do a surprise attack. They will do it. The sub rolled a 4. It missed. This sub now will do a surprise attack. It rolled. It missed. It did a 6. At this point, if either one of these subs had hit during the surprise attack, then the unit that the player decided to eliminate would be eliminated now, and there would be no counter attack. All right, now the subs did their surprise attack. Both of them chose to fight instead of submerge and disappearing. We will move on to every other unit involved in the battle. We still got one of these battleships here for Germany. We're going to roll for that. It is a 5. Germany missed. So the attacker rolled off. 2 misses. He didn't get any hits. There are no casualties. But the defender still gets a turn to counterattack. So he's going to roll 1 die for each unit they have and see if he gets hits. If they do, then they will apply those hits to the attacker's side, but the attackers do not get to do a counterattack in this case. If they are hit, the enemy unit is simply removed. The attacker unit is simply removed. All right, so left in the battle is the aircraft carrier and the fighter. This sub did a surprise attack, so it is eliminated from the rest of this round of combat, as well as this one is. All right. We're going to roll 2 dice. 1 for the aircraft carrier, 1 for the fighter. All right, if we look here, we got 1 miss and 1 hit. So now, airplanes cannot hit submarines unless there's a destroyer involved on their side, and it has to be their destroyer. I'll get back into that in a second. So he would do a hit. The German player would choose to decide which unit they would like to get hit. Normally, if a unit is hit 1 time, it is eliminated from the battle as a casualty. We take it off the board. Battleships have a 2-point allotment for hits. So, in this case, the German player here is going to choose to take the battleship as taking damage, and we would flip it on its side to show it took 1 hit of damage. Now, at the end of the battle, if the battleship had survived, we would flip that back up, and it would be like a brand new battleship. It would just simply be placed back in the zone that the battle actually took place in. Whereas any other unit in the game, if it were hit once, it would be taken off the board. All right, so now that was the first round. The U-boats and the submarine here, they did their surprise attack. The aircraft carrier and the fighter survived. The battleship took 1 hit of damage. We flipped it on its side to show that. Now we would just simply rinse and repeat, but this time the submarines do not get to do their surprise attack action. The attacker would go again, but everything would roll simultaneously, you know, as the battle's going on, and we would a lot damage like we would normally. So Germany's going to roll 2 dice. They got 2 hits, a 1 and a 1. All right, it is lower than 4 and 2. So, like I said, submarines cannot hit airplanes. So, the defender has a choice. They can either use the submarine as a casualty or the aircraft carrier as a casualty. We're going to say they're going to use this guy here. Now, the battleship can hit airplanes, so the defender has to make a choice which one of these 2 units they're going to use as a casualty, either the aircraft carrier or the fighter. They will choose the aircraft carrier at this point. Okay, and we're going to put both of those up here on the casualty board or behind it if you have room. The casualties will get a chance to do a counterattack, which we'll do now. We'll roll off. We still use their same value. If they get anything from that value less, they would do a hit. So let's see here. We got 2 and 4. 4 misses. 2 does hit for either one of these guys. All right. The Germans will choose to lose their submarine, in which case the Germans do not get to counterattack. It's simply removed from the board. Okay, and then the casualty units will get removed from the board. This airplane still has a counterattack, so we will roll for that. Got a 4. It missed. So now we're going into another round of combat. We got the battleship and the fighter left. The Germany is going to attack. Now, as we can see, we have the airplane and the transport here. All right, now, say instead of using the fighter during this battle, the UK had a ship in the defense slot here. At this point, there's 2 units left. There is the destroyer here and the transport. The UK must lose any ships other than the transport if they can. All right, they cannot choose to use the transport as a casualty to, save on a ship that costs more. If at all possible and there is a ship involved, every other ship must be eliminated from the board before the transport is. But we had an airplane which can attack both land and sea. So the defender has a choice now. They're going to lose this airplane. All right, the airplane gets a counterattack, and it missed. All right, so Germany survived. Now, England took off the airplane. It's eliminated from the board. The only thing left is this transport. The transport cannot attack or defend. It is automatically destroyed. Any of the cargo it has on it is also destroyed, removing it from the game. They do not do a counterattack. All right, now we're going to take any remaining units from the sea battle and place it back in the zone that the sea battle took place in. And like I said, if a battleship is damaged, it is now like a new boat. All right, so that's how a battle round worked for a sea zone with a submarine without a destroyer on it. We're going to come over here to sea zone 23. Okay, we got the sub and the aircraft carrier. Japan's going to attack first with the surprise attack. So he's going to roll, and he's going to get a 1. Like it was magic or something. All right, so this aircraft carrier is hit. It goes to the casualty board, but it does not get a chance to counterattack because this was the surprise attack. We eliminate it from the game. The submarine goes back to the space where the battle started. That's the end of the combat. All right, now let's go over here to this sea zone over here with this German aircraft carrier and this English submarine. All right, we're going to place them on the battle board. Now, there's no destroyers on either side. The sub will get a surprise attack. We're going to give it a roll. Let's say it got a 1 or a 2, which it needs 2 or lower to hit. In this case, it destroys this aircraft carrier. All right, in a surprise attack, there is no counterattack. The aircraft carrier is simply destroyed and removed from the board. Normally, you would go into another round of combat, but planes cannot attack submarines, and submarines cannot attack planes unless there is a destroyer available. So, in this case, we would simply take both of these pieces and place it back into the zone that it belongs to, where the battle commenced. If this airplane cannot get to safety, it will be destroyed, whether it won the battle or not. Okay, it has an opportunity to go 1 zone in any direction from the zone that the battle is taking place and try and get to safety. If it cannot, like I said, it's gone. All right, let's take a look at Sea Zone 13 again. We have the Germans attacking the British here. The British have a sub and a battleship. We will throw them on the board. The Germans have a fighter, a battleship, and a destroyer. Okay, now in this case, the UK submarine cannot do a surprise attack because there is a destroyer in play. And normally airplanes cannot attack submarines, but because Germany has a destroyer in play, this airplane can now attack this submarine. So we will commence battle like normal. There will be no surprise attack roll. We will simply go into the main battle. Germany will go first with 3 dice. And we'll give them a roll. They got 2 hits. England will decide which units to take the 2 hits. So the sub will take a hit. And the destroyer, or the battleship here, will take 1 point of damage. The battleship cannot take 2 points of damage and be eliminated. You have to do 1 ship and then the battleship. Okay. Now, they get to roll for a defense. They will. The battleship hit. The sub missed. The sub is eliminated from the board. The battleship will assign a hit. The German player will decide which unit to get hit. We will say the airplane here. Okay, and then it'll commence. Germany would roll 2 dice now because they lost a unit. They get a hit. The battleship will do a counter effect because it's still there for England. They get a hit. They resolve it. And whoever remains goes back to the board. Okay, we got a battle here. This is a real easy one. The destroyer is an enemy ship. It wins the battle. The transport and any cargo it has is eliminated from the game. They do not get to do a counterattack. Alright, now I'm going to explain the most complex battle in the game. This involves 2 different countries being attacked by 1 country. Alright, it involves submarines and destroyers from all 3 countries. Well, 2 destroyers. Alright, let's go to the board. This battle will take place in Sea Zone 38. Alright, Japan is attacking the US and the Brits. This fighter came from the Caroline Islands here to join the attack. Alright, they have a battleship, a fighter, a submarine, and a destroyer. The Brits here have a submarine, an aircraft carrier holding a U.S. Fighter, and their fighter came off to help defend them in the attack. There is also a transport with both Brit and U.S. troops. The U.S. comes into the battle with 1 submarine and 1 destroyer. Now, what will happen is this submarine's effects will be canceled by this destroyer, as well as this submarine and this submarine's effect being canceled by this destroyer. Alright, so that effect is canceled out. Airplanes can, however, hit submarines now that the destroyer canceled out the submarine's battle effect. Okay, submarines could also hit other submarines. However, this submarine cannot detect this submarine because this cruiser is canceling out the effect. Alright, so now Japan will attack 1 country first. Let's say the Brits. And then they will finish, that round of combat with the Brits. But before they move on to the second round of combat, they will then go to the Americans and combat them. Then, if there's any units left over, they can go into a second round. Or the Japan force can choose to retreat. Alright, so let's go to the board. Alright, so Japan rolled 4 dice. Battleship got a hit. The fighter got a hit. And the sub and the destroyer both get a hit. The Brits will choose which units they chose to be hit. So they'll say the submarine for 1 hit, the aircraft carrier for a 2nd hit. Now, it's carrying the US's fighter. That is just cargo. It will become a casualty along with the aircraft carrier. All right, you cannot control another player's figures if they are riding your ship. Okay, so the battleship we'll say hit the submarine. The plane here hit the aircraft carrier. Now, the submarine cannot hit an aircraft. So, these units here will be destroyed. They will become casualties. They cannot counterattack, so I'm just pushing them off to the side for now. The destroyer will then hit this fighter. So that's 4 hits. Whatever's left here will do a counterattack. So we will roll 1 die for the fighter, 1 die for the aircraft carrier, and 1 die for the sub on the Brit side. Alright, and they get 1 hit. Now the fighter is the only thing that can hit a unit on the board, alright? It cannot hit this submarine because even though there is a destroyer out there, it is the US's destroyer. And apparently they could not communicate fast enough, so they cannot hit a submarine. So the Japanese would have to choose either a plane or their battleship. Let's say they chose their battleship. Okay, remember battleships take 2 damage points, so we will flip it on its side to show that it took the first hit. And if it took the second hit, we would put it on the casualty board and, eliminate it as such. So that was the first part of this combat. Now Japan will attack the US here. Again, their destroyers counter out each other's submarines, so there's no surprise attack. Japan will roll, again, 4 dice. See what the results are. Japan has rolled 2 hits. They can assign it to any of the units they want to on the board. Remember, normally a submarine cannot be hit by an aircraft, but the Japanese have a destroyer out here which cancels out the effects of the submarine. So that submarine for the U.S. force can be hit by this airplane. So let's say they chose 1 hit to be distributed by the battleship and 1 by the airplane. The U.S. player would choose both of these to go into the casualty board, and then they would roll for damage. So they would roll 2 dice and they get 1 hit and 1 miss. The Japanese would then have to choose 1 of their units to be hit. Alright, and in this case, the destroyer would hit, okay? The submarine wouldn't, so it could be any unit on the board. Now, if it were the submarine that would do the hit, then it could only be sea vessels. Alright, so Japan will say they'll lose their submarine. It gets eliminated off the board right away. All of the casualties from the Allied side gets removed from the board. And you would move on to place all of the winning side's forces back in the zone that the battle had taken place at. If the battleship were hit, it would be revived to its full strength again, and you would move on to the next combat or phase of the game. Alright, now, so we had a situation like this. Let's do one more example of sea battle. Say we are fighting here in Sea Zone 39. Japan is attacking the US and the Brits. Japan has a sub and a destroyer along with a battleship. The US has a destroyer and the Brits have a sub. Now, in this case, this destroyer prevents this submarine from doing a surprise attack against the Japanese forces here. This destroyer does not prevent this submarine from surprise attacking the Brits because they are on different countries. Even though they are allies, they cannot communicate to each other. So Japan would get a surprise attack with the submarine first. Let's say they got a 1. The Brits would then have to destroy their submarine. Being it's a surprise attack, they would not get a counterattack. They would get simply removed from the board. This submarine is now out of the combat round. Japan would continue its attack against the Americans here, rolling 2 dice, 1 for the destroyer, 1 for the battleship. Okay, they got 1 hit. In this case, America would lose their ship. The Americans would then roll for their counterattack for the destroyer. And if they got a hit, let's say they did, Japan would have to choose 1 of their ships left to be hit. In this case, they would obviously choose the battleship because they would get the battleship back, whereas the other case, they would lose the destroyer. And that is how combat works with 2 different countries being attacked by a sub with a destroyer. Okay, so they are the 2 most complicated rules in this game. If you got them, you got this joint. You know, if I could explain that to you to a point you can understand, you had this game under control. Alright, now we're going to get into amphibious assault. You can use transports to move troops, like I said earlier, but they cannot enter a hostile zone. So anytime you're going to do an amphibious assault, meaning you're going to transport troops onto land to do battle, then you must clear any hostile sea zones first. Alright, so if we look down here, we have the English with this battleship and this sub, along with this transport carrying US and English troops, in a zone with this Japanese aircraft carrier and a fighter. Alright, now being there are no battleships, the submarine would take its surprise attack. Let's say it rolled a 1 and it sunk this battleship or aircraft carrier, leaving the fighter in the attack. Remember, it's a surprise attack, so the aircraft carrier is destroyed right off the bat. There is no counterattack. Then we go into the rest of the battle. So the sub took its surprise attack. It is out of the battle. Now the battleship and the plane will fight off. And let's say that the battleship destroyed the aircraft. And the aircraft gave the battleship 1 hit of damage. The plane is removed. Now this transport can load troops onto the land, even if they are not their own. And they could commence battle in that land, and then they would roll off and do the combat. All right, now at this point they cannot control any allied units, only their own. And let's say they attacked Japan here and they didn't finish off the job. Japan killed them off. Now on the Americans' turn, they could go out and attack Japan already, because their end of the amphibious assault still didn't take place. Remember, all this is simultaneously, even though you're taking it one at a time. Now, if a land unit were to retreat, all they would have to do is simply move 1 space into a territory that an ally controls. If they could not, as in the case of the Germans here, then they would simply lose any units in that zone that they had there. Now, as I said, anytime you take control or conquer a territory, you automatically gain the number of IPCs that territory controls if they have them, and you gain control of the factory if that territory has it on your next turn, not right away. If your capital is conquered, then at that point, any IPCs you have go to the person who conquered you. You will lose the IPC number along with the factory, like you would if you were conquered normally. From that point on, you cannot collect income or purchase troops. You will only have what is out on the board to fight with. You cannot produce troops either. All right, and that will continue until you are either liberated or eliminated. So here, Germany took over Russia's capital. Russia will lose all the credits they have. Germany will gain that 1 IPC credit they did have, adding it to their total IPCs. From here on out, Germany will collect these IPCs and they will be able to produce units in that territory, but they have to abide by the production limit number, which is also the IPC number. Russia will only be able to fight with these units here because they are the only ones on the board left. They will not be able to produce any of these units in further rounds, and they will not be able to collect any income. Now we're going to get into liberating. All right, so they say later on, the English come in here, they beat the Germans, they liberate the Russian capital. At this point, you would remove the control marker of the Germans or whoever had control of the territory before you liberated it. The IPCs and the factory would go back to the Russian control, okay? England would not take control of that. They would not put one of their markers on there and then say, I can use this IPC number and factory later on. It would all revert back to Russia or whoever the ally is that you are liberating their territory from. All right, so that was the combat phase of the game. That is the most complicated phase of the game. After that, it's all breeze. Okay, now we go into non-combat movement phase. During this, any units that did not take part in combat can move to another territory as long as they abide by the their movement rules. And any planes that were involved in combat must now go to a friendly territory with the points of movement that they had reserved. And remember, you must always reserve points of movement for planes to get back to friendly areas. All right, so we're going to come down here. Russia took their turn. They're going to move some units to reinforce other parts of the board. So they will split this army of 3 into 2 separate armies. I'm just going to grab one of these guys because I don't have any left. Okay, now they're going to choose to move this army into this zone. And then they could choose to move this army into this zone if they wanted to, as long as it is in a friendly zone. It could be theirs. Could be one of your allies. All right, so say down here, Russia decided they want to move this unit into here, which is controlled by the U.S. They're allies. They could do that as long as the units did not be involved with combat. Okay, so airplanes got to go back. Remember, we went up here. we're going to go back 2 points of movement to safety in the UK. Remember, we cannot interact with neutral territories at all. Same thing with Germany here. We won this territory with Germany during combat. They're simply going to go 1 over here to North Africa. All right, and that's basically it. Just remember, if you were going to move units into an unoccupied enemy territory, you would do that during the combat phase, not during the non-combat phase. We are now going to go into the mobilization phase. Before we purchase some units, now we can place them out on the board. I'm going to go back to Russia for this example because they are the ones that purchased it. Remember, all this takes place 1 player at a time, starting with Russia. All right, so Russia has 2 units that they purchased earlier. Now they can place it out on the board as long as they have a factory left to place it at. Now, when you produce a unit, they must be placed in a factory that you control. Okay, it must be you that controls it, not one of your allies. And then you would simply place the units in that territory. If you produced more units than you could place in your territories that have factories, you would lose any units that you could not place. So say Russia overproduced. They thought they had these 2 factories to place the units in. They did not. They produced 5 instead of 3. They could place 3 here, and any remaining units that were produced would be lost. Again, if you were to lose the territory that your capital is in, you lose all benefits of the factory. Any money would go to the player who conquered you, and you are basically stuck without purchasing or producing units throughout the game. Whatever territories you had left is what you had to fight with, and if they get eliminated, you are eliminated. Now, if you purchased a ship earlier and you're going to produce it now, instead of putting them in a space with a factory, because they are all land, doesn't make sense, you would simply place the ship in the space adjacent to it that has a sea space. Notice Russia up here. They only have 1 factory that is adjacent to sea. If you are playing the short game, they cannot produce ships. Okay, they must conquer an enemy factory, an enemy territory with a factory on it next to a sea space in order to produce ships. Now, during production, if you produce a ship and it is dumped in a sea zone with hostile ships in it, you will not necessarily go into a hostile zone. Okay, if it is a submarine or a transport, then you do not have to enter combat. This is not considered a hostile zone. Okay, you could move your transport during the non-combat phase like normal. Again, submarines do not determine whether a zone is hostile or friendly. But if any hostile surface ship goes into that sea zone other than a transport, that sea zone is considered hostile. So if the U.S. were to produce a ship here and there was the Japanese destroyer here, they would enter combat immediately. They could not move out of the zone during the non-combat phase. Okay, now, remember how I said an airplane must get back to a friendly zone if possible? If you get to a sea zone that is next to a zone that produces ships, and you produce an aircraft carrier, that airplane can land on the aircraft carrier as though it was a friendly ship, even though it wasn't there to begin with. All right, so it will be safe. All right, and that's basically production. You can place any units that you purchased on a board. If they are land units, they have to go in a factory space that you control, you, not your allies. If they are a sea unit, they will go to a space that is adjacent to a land area with a factory that you control. All right, so now we go into the income phase. At the end of our turn, during the income phase now, we will see how many territories we still control and if they have the NPC, IPC production number on it. We will add them up, double checking it with the NPC chart to make sure they correspond. All right, let's say they do. Germany has 7 points of NPCs. All right, I know it's not true. We're just going to go with it. At this point, they would add that number to any credited IPCs they had and get their new numbers. So 1 plus 7 would be 8. Germany would start their next turn with $8 to buy units with. Now remember, if your capital is captured, You cannot collect income and you cannot purchase units. You're basically out of the game until you either get your capital back or you are eliminated from the game. So that's basically how a turn works. Starting with a Russian player, you will do those 6 phases in that order. The purchasing phase, then the combat movement phase, the combat phase, the non-combat phase, the mobilization phase, and finally the income phase. Play will pass on to the next player. Once all 5 countries has taken their turn, and the US will be the last player to do that, that will be the end of the round. At this point, if any of the winning conditions were fulfilled, whoever did those winning conditions would win the game. So if the Allies have captured Berlin and or Tokyo, they will win the game. If the Axis has captured DC and or London and or Moscow, they will win the game. All right, and that's how you play Axis and Allies 1941. Stay tuned. I'll do a demonstration of the game.